BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an gestural implant, 68 milligrams radiopaque. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
That was a clip from, I have to get this right, they're always really hard to pronounce and they're terrible to have to write down, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And I'm delighted to be joined for a Film Stories podcast special in a posh London hotel in which someone appears to be sitting in the corner of the room.
Making sure we don't screw up.
Making sure we don't mess this up by Wes Ball. Hello, Wes Ball.
Hello.
How are you, first of all?
Good.
This must be quite surreal. We're sat talking about making a Planet of the Apes film. By my reckoning, the only 8 directors have... You're the 8th director.
Am I 8? Yeah, okay, interesting.
To make a Planet of the Apes film.
Yeah, there's been 10 altogether.
Yeah.
1968 was the very first one.
Yeah.
And yeah, I grew up on watching that movie, oddly. I was born in 1980, so I have no reason to watch a movie that was that old, but there's something about it. So it's kind of wild that I find myself now a part of this long legacy of movies. It's quite an honor.
So if you watched it in the 1980s, that would be on VHS before they put the front cover that spoiled the end of the film.
The thing is, I didn't even have VHS when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in the middle of nowhere.
You were 100 miles from cinema, weren't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, I'll cut 100, but maybe like 50 or something like that.
It's enough.
But it was an hour away, I'll say that, of a long drive. But my dad, I'm getting in trouble here, but he used to tape everything on VHS.
Yeah.
So this is the VHS tapes. We never bought VHS, but I had a cabinet full of just tapes off of HBO and Cinemax and all this stuff. And so
trouble, is it?
I think it's technically illegal to tape, I think, broadcasts and stuff, I believe.
Oh, you're in the UK, it wasn't here.
Oh, well, it was okay, interesting.
They were going to bring in a law where you could only, when VHS first came in,
interesting,
where you could only hold a recording for about 3 weeks or 3 months or something. They couldn't get it through. So you're absolutely safe.
I'm safe here. So
confess all your
okay, good.
Habits right here.
But it was a huge cabinet. I mean, there must have been thousands of things. 3 movies per tape, and I just go through as a kid playing Legos and watching movies all day long. And this was always one of them. It was awesome.
So before we get into the film itself, I'm coming to the film slightly later on, but can I just establish where you're comfortable on the spoiler line talking about it? How much are you comfortable for us to know? Because I generally go very spoiler light. I don't watch trailers, so when I see a film, I'm watching them completely.
That's awesome. That's the way I prefer it.
Yeah.
I have there's a constant love-hate thing with marketing departments, that want to give away everything, and I want to not show everything, but they need to get asses in chairs.
Yes.
But yeah, I'll be as spoiler-free as you would like. I'd prefer to be as little as possible. So
it's got apes in it, and it's set a couple of 100 years after the last one.
And our job here is done. Thank you very much.
Smashing. Let's go home. There's a bar down here,
right.
I think. So take me to your formative years, because your story's really... I've been watching a lot of your early work over the last 24 hours.
Cool.
And I've watched interviews you've done in front of a Goonies poster, and I hope you've been listening to the Dave Grusin extended score.
I haven't.
Have you not?
No.
Extended CD of that is amazing.
Oh, awesome.
But you hinted there about how your film years, your formative film years, were taping things entirely legally off the television.
That's right.
And wearing out VHS tapes.
That's right.
So Planet of the Apes was one of those. What were the films that you were watching? What were the VHS tapes that took the most wear and tear?
There's so many of them. It's crazy, but it's all the stuff in the 80s and 90s. That's the stuff I grew up on. Everything Spielberg did, of course, and Robert Zemeckis did, and James Cameron did. Also really weird stuff like Midnight Madness, which probably no one's ever seen before. Really strange things like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's like I used to watch those things, not necessarily thinking I was going to be using them as sort of like inspiration in my future life, but they're a part of me now, and they're my DNA, my choices, whether I realize it or not. You know what I mean?
And so, I don't know what the television era was like in America in the 80s, but I grew up in the 80s in the UK. We also had TV shows that curated films.
Interesting.
Where, because you had Siskel and Ebert, didn't you? Which gave you.
Yeah, I never watched them though.
Did you
Yeah, no, yeah.
But there were shows we had over here, such as Movie Drone with Alex Cox, where he would take time and educate you about film and then show you.
Oh, that's cool.
Like a film school for those of us who were never going to get anywhere near it. Did you have anything like that?
No, I didn't. That sounds awesome though. I just replayed movies over and over again. I know my mom would just be like, "You're playing that movie again?" I would sit there and just repeat these things over and over, and where I could just, obviously, I think all movie fans could repeat all the lines of all their favorite movies and stuff, But yeah, it was just a great way to grow up,
So what was your most, you're not allowed to say Planet of the Apes, because it's too relevant to this conversation, but what was the one that you really did have on endless repeat?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'll say this, like one of the first movie that really said, whoa, there's a thing called a director, and there's a process of making a movie interesting. It was really Jurassic Park for me. I was 13 years old when it came out. Before that, another one that was really crucial for me was James Cameron's Terminator 2.
Yeah.
I had seen that before I saw Terminator 1. It was my first R-rated movie. I was 11 years old. My dad took me to the theater. We were on vacation somewhere. He's like, "You want to go see the Terminator movie? It's rated R. Don't tell your mother," And that movie just blew my mind. You know what I mean? And those movies really shaped me. They were definitely the things that kind of put in my mind what great movies were, which are for me like big mass entertainment stuff, but also movies that had a point, that had like character and emotion that you kind of drew you in. That's what I certainly try to do now. You know what I mean?
But you also, as well, I mean, lots of us were watching films on loop in the 80s, but I'm freely digging into other interviews that you've done here. But what was different in your case, from what I can work out, is you also had access to a Commodore Amiga and a man called Mr. Thomas.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you really did go do your research. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious about that, because I look for turning points that kind of got us to where they are.
Yeah, that was definitely one of them for me. I was in high school for me. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really know anything about movie making necessarily. I definitely had this urge to do something with the. When I was a kid, I liked magic tricks a lot. That sense of like putting on a show for somebody. I'm not a good. Exactly, but I'm not a performer, so it didn't really work out very well. But I enjoyed the kind of craft of the technical kind of process of that illusion thing. And then I would start kind of doing I'd record me blowing up my sister's Barbie cars, and that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It's probably the typical thing for a lot of young filmmakers. You know what I mean? But yeah, I was in high school where my tech teacher kind of put me in a closet basically and said, don't come out until this thing's working. It was a video toaster, and that was kind of this little system, and it was amazing because it was just wired the whole school. It was a very small town, so it was just like the peak of technology. It was like no one really understood it, and here I was this kid figuring out how to use this stuff and plug it into the entire system over every TV in all the classrooms of the whole school. I had that power, you know what I mean? And it was amazing to have that. And we had one or two pranks where I would like do some broadcasts or take over all this the TVs and put up something crazy and silly. It was a fun time, to just kind of like dabble in like the tech behind. Storytelling. I made a tiny short film there with one of my friends, one of my actress friends there, and it's totally silly. It was called The Bot. It was totally imaginative, title, and it was just about. It was my first kind of like, I'm going to put CG into a movie frame, essentially. Yeah. And it was the first time you could digitize. In this case, it was Super VHS. Yes. Right, so it was a little bit higher resolution, and I captured it in. I had this DPS video capture card that you could capture the stuff in. It was amazing. I was editing in a non-linear editor. I don't even know what the software was anymore. But we made this little tiny 320 by 240, pixel video of this little floating robot that chased her through a library. And I don't even know if I have that anymore anywhere. But that was like my first little like stab at trying to make something. You know what I mean? And then we went off to college, and and I didn't know I was going to be a director. I thought I was going to be an editor. I thought I was going to work in special effects or something. And then we made some shorts, and I got the bug, of that same thing, the magic trick, giving people an illusion. I just loved that part of it. So
first of all, I want to acknowledge the fact that the Commodore Amiga was an amazing computer.
Indeed.
Amazing computer. They sold it mainly as a games computer.
Right. Interesting.
That's primarily what I used it for.
Interesting.
As well.
Yeah.
But also, I got a story that when you were starting to experiment with filmmaking, when you started to get access to things, you made a kind of low-tech knockoff of The Matrix.
Yeah, well, that was in film school, right? So what's great about the FSU Film School, where I got started, was we shot on film. We were one of the last classes actually shot on film, right? So, and that's a hell of a good learning experience, because the very first time we weren't allowed to touch the editing bay, so you had to edit in camera. Which I always say is a really good training ground, where you have to think about your shots and think about your timing. It's almost like animation in a weird way. It's a good training ground for storytelling. And it was like our second movie or something. There was 30 people in our class. They gave us 100 feet of 16 millimeter reversal film. We had a wind up World War II Bolex camera. You know what I mean? It was that kind of thing. And I was like, I'm gonna go remake The Matrix. I had no sound.
100 feet.
Yeah, and I had no sound, and I had no editorial kind of thing. So, because it was a silent film era thing, I had to print out all the dialogue on old timey text screens. You know what I mean? So I pasted them up on the wall. I go shoot my shots, and as soon as I thought that was done, I rolled over to the wall and shoot the whoa, in silent, text, on screen on a piece of paper printed out, and then I remember just putting that thing together, not knowing what the hell we were going to get, because they sent off to the lab and it comes back processed, and we all sit down and watch each other's films in the class, and it came up, and you play some random music track with it just to accompany it, and it just all my classmates, they just went nuts. Yeah. They just loved it. It was so different than what other people were doing at the time. I was just doing some silly experimental stuff, and I just it was like, play it again. You know what I mean? It was awesome. It was really, really cool. I called it The Metrics because it was different, It was my buddy Dan, who I'm still friends with to this day, and he's out in Los Angeles too, and still old friend. And it's fantastic. That's what kind of really gave me the bug of maybe I want to direct. You know what I mean? So yeah.
And for us in the UK, you talked about growing up in Florida. Florida was just not. I know Disney had a studio there at one point, there was just nothing, was there?
Yeah, there was nobody. That was the good thing about, say, the FSU Film School at the time and where I grew up, was that it was nowhere near Hollywood, and the bad thing was that it was nowhere near Hollywood, right? So it was a blessing and a curse, because like I'm not playing that game. We're just kind of making stuff, which is great. But at the same time, you kind of have to start from zero when you go do to Hollywood, and you really don't have any necessarily connections. You know what I mean?
But one of the recurring things that's come through in conversations you've done is the importance of relationships in the film industry.
Sure.
And I wonder, growing up and being in an environment that relied on favours and perhaps people not in the film industry, you're asking your friend for this and will you do that? Did that start to foster that part of it for you?
Yeah, for me that was film school mainly. Yeah. It's like that's the relationships that you forge there with all your kind of peers. I mean, Barry Jenkins, for instance, was in my class. He's a good friend of mine.
What happened to him?
Yeah, exactly. He's putting us all to shame. He's a fantastic filmmaker. Yeah. And Tom Scott Nolan, who wrote all the Maze Runner movies. Yeah. For instance, he was in class with us. The friends that we made there in film school were so crucially important, and they're still some of my closest friends to this day. And then we all moved out together, and we kind of had that support, whereas we all try to find jobs doing PA work or whatever it was. And I had the one fortunate thing is that I just had a short film that won an award. Won a couple of awards that was animation, and I had a lot of people kind of, say, hey, you know how to do computer animation stuff. You want to do this stuff? I got a lot of work early on with just doing, kind of some of the work that, big VFX houses were doing. And so they could save a lot of money using this kid that uses his computer in his room,
You talked about editing in camera there, and it's kind of skill that's very useful. I remember I know there's a lot of snobbery towards TikTok creators and stuff like that. Sure. I remember watching a TikTok creator show me how they did that, because the assumption is that a load of TikTok videos are just edited. Yeah. And in fact, there was this just really beautifully put together shot, but they just planned it to the nth degree. Right. Yeah. But do you think that the planning bit is, when we can put our material out really easily, when I can put something on YouTube tomorrow or TikTok tomorrow, do you think we're losing that a little bit? Is that a discipline that's kind of in decline?
Well, I think, I don't know if it's in decline. I think we're just seeing a lot more stuff. But there'll always be that 10% that's the best. You know what I mean? And usually the best is probably people who took it seriously and really took a lot of care and thought about it and planned it out. You know what I mean? So, I'm not sure that it's being lost. I think it stands out when it's done. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, you're right. There's some incredible stuff on TikTok that it's mind blowing. The kind of level of execution that they achieve sometimes. It's really impressive and inspiring.
I remember a YouTube clip going viral, which was just a drone shot, just going around a 10-pin bowling alley, which I think you did it with James Gunn, just inviting them onto a Guardians of the Galaxy set.
Oh, really?
It's just like,
Interesting.
It does give like people on the outside hope that there's a way in just off the back of sheer talent, stuff like that.
Yeah, and it comes through. And I think when people say talent, they're usually talking about taste. You know what I mean? Really?
Interesting.
You know, for the most part.
Yeah.
And there's always you can always learn execution stuff. You can always learn shot design or whatever, that kind of stuff. But it's that taste of knowing what's right and what's wrong, I think, is something that's hard to learn. You kind of can't learn it. You know what I mean? But you're right. It's like we're making so much stuff now, but we always find something that's cool. It's the same thing with movies. Like, oh, the movies are getting worse. No, they're not. We've always just had those few movies that hit every year that become these things. And it's the same way now. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that the good stuff always finds its way somehow, you know.
Are you a believer in kind of like column A, column B? There's the stuff you can teach someone and this is stuff that they just instinctively know?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. I mean, it'd be nice to say, oh, you can do it. Anyone can do it.
Yeah.
You know, it's that Ratatouille thing, right? It's like not just anyone can cook, but a good cook can come from anywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's true, I think. Anyone can do this, but it doesn't mean that everyone can do this. But I do think there is a level of intuitive stuff that I certainly rely on myself. And when I'm making stuff, is I don't overthink things. I just kind of go with my gut. A lot of times that proves right. Sometimes it doesn't. You learn from that. You know what I mean? So there is experience that plays into this, I think, with each movie. You know, you look back on it and you say, I would have done this differently, or I wish I did that differently. You know what I mean? But that's part of the game. You know, the minute that I feel like I've done that perfectly, you know, I know I probably won't make movies anymore. You know, because after each movie, you kind of, you know, personally, I tend to look at it and say, I can do better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's part of the drive, I guess. You know.
Ratatouille is a fascinating film to look at.
Yeah, totally.
How the end result transcended just the tumultuous behind the scenes of that.
Oh, yeah.
I think Brad Bird wrote the final speech just at the very, very last minute.
Something like that, right? He's a great filmmaker, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I read I think it's the book on the making of Chinatown. We just issued Chinatown. It's an absolute masterpiece. But you read into the nuance of the making of it, and it was just chaos and last-minute decisions. And,
that's a lot of movies.
Clashing,
Movie making is that, though. You know, it is the art of compromise and invention and problem solving. I think that's more than anything. That's what a director does more than anything is problem solve. Whether it's, you know, how to get the actor out of the trailer, or it's like, I can't get this shot that I planned for 2 months on because the truck got stuck coming up the mountain or whatever it is, so I got to reinvent something. You know, you're constantly problem solving, and that's what you have to be. You have to be really good at, I think, as a filmmaker. You know.
I interviewed many years ago director Jennifer Yu Nelson, just as she was coming off she did the first 3 Kung Fu Panda movies.
Oh, yes, right.
And she was coming off the back of the 3rd one, and she told me about a job she had early in her career where she was working for the kind of animation studio that if Disney was re-releasing Snow White, it would have, let's just inverted commas say, an alternate version of Snow White.
Right, interesting.
And whilst she wasn't suggesting it was anywhere near her best work, because she was willing to go right into the grass and do the nitty-gritty at a small company and end up trying all the little jobs, by the time she got to something of much bigger scale and importance, she'd made a lot of her mistakes.
Yeah.
And she'd learned a lot of her stuff. I wonder if there's a little bit of a sense of that with you, because I dug into oddball animation a little bit, your company. You were like doing DVD menus and promos and logos and things like that.
Yeah.
What did you learn there while no one was looking?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of my work that I did early on, you know, I did visual effects work for like The Apprentice and that kind of stuff. You know, I literally, you know, fixed Trump's hair.
Is that
in
not
shots.
your Oscar reel?
That's right. I'm sorry, world. I'm the one who brought. It's all my fault. But you know, it's wild the stuff that we did for that thing of just like using different takes and changing his tie so it looked like it was all, you know, it was all continuity wise.
This is not where I thought this chat
That's
was
right.
going to go.
It was wild. I did a lot of that stuff, but you know, for me, a lot of that stuff was I didn't know what I was doing. I had to figure it out, and there was no one else to lean on. It was my job to do this. I said that I could do this. I have to deliver. Yeah. That sense of I have to deliver, and I figure out how to do it. I figure out a way. That's where I learned that more than anything. I had a week, you know, before it aired, and I have to deliver this on Thursday, and there's no way I can't not deliver. It's not an option. And so I think to push yourself when like, you know, you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
You know, and then in these unique circumstances you find yourself in with what you have to deliver. It is interesting to kind of, you know, push yourself to that edge where I don't know what I'm doing or where I'm going or how I'm going to achieve this, but somehow, where there's a will, there's a way. You figure it out. That was a huge learning experience for me. That was, I think, informative, you know. Yeah. Thanks, Donald Trump.
You still lost me at fixing his hair and fixing his tie.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
So I mean, with the best will in the world, had you made a mistake on those, you'd have just been fired, for want of a better putting. The world wouldn't have known that it was you that got that wrong.
Yeah.
So you could make that mistake.
Yeah, maybe.
With some degree of cover and safety.
Sort of. I don't know. Like, weirdly, I should not have had that job. You know what I mean? Like, there's just this one guy, the editor, who was, you know, they were used to sending this work off to like full-on production houses, like visual effects houses, and it was like, you know what? We could save a lot of money by giving it to this kid, and then also get my little fee for delivering it too. So he was making a little money as I was making money. I was making really good money for a kid out in Los Angeles. Yeah. But I was at such a high level that there was no room for failure. You know what I mean? So the pressure was extreme. You know, to be in that situation. But like I said, that was its own kind of, you know, testing ground. You know, to rise to the occasion. You know what I mean?
And that was when it was like one of the most top-rated shows in America as well. And behind the scenes, there's a kid who's just said, "I can do this."
Who's trying to keep the illusion alive? Or there's cameramen walking through the shots and all this crazy stuff. You know? So it was fun. And that, and like you said, the DVD menu stuff, and I started up a little company just kind of like, you know, just pay the bills. You know, and it was fun to be the guy essentially that, you know, that is counted on. You know.
That's incredible. The point where you're putting your work out with your name on it, though, I mean, they're still on YouTube. Your very, very early stuff. What led to that? The first couple that you put out. I mean, even before we get to Ruin, you've got your Jesus film on there.
The supply side Jesus thing.
And you put a couple of things out there that you leave up there, which I think is fascinating because most people don't show their working to how they've got to where they're going.
Well, I'm also a part of that generation that grew up when that was just starting. You know what I mean? I remember when I put Ruin out, like that was a short going viral was not the usual thing. You know what I mean? You go to the festival route, and I remember saying, I'm not going to put this in the festival. I'm just going to put it out online for people to watch. You know, and it became this viral thing, and it kind of started my career basically. But yeah, you're right. In film school, I put up all my. There's still a few shorts that I haven't put up. I'd like to put up that Metrics actually, but I think the film school has it somewhere still in their archives. So I want to find it one day because, like I said, it was really fantastic for me. It was important. It might have lost it by now. Who knows? But that's fascinating, and I know I enjoy seeing that stuff, and I think it shows everyone. I mean, you see everyone's kind of early stuff, and like, oh my gosh, you know, they make the same mistakes I do. It somehow is humbling in that way, you know, and like you realize, oh, I can do this. You know what I mean? So yeah, I leave that stuff up, and it's kind of fun. I don't know if people actually watch it.
I mean, if we look at Spielberg, most people assume the first thing he put out was Duel.
Yeah, right.
Duel is just like
Amblin.
Amazing.
You ever seen Amblin?
But you go back further. There's the television episodes. There's Amblin. So even Aardman Animation here. Yeah. It's just like their early stuff was just Aardman, wasn't it?
But you do see the hint of like the talent.
Yeah.
The taste, whatever it is that is there, like with Amblin, you really see that Spielberg in there. And Duel, especially Duel, like
Duel's great.
He was 21. It's stunning. It's you know, it's crazy. He makes stuff. He's just something else. He's on a different level. I study Spielberg obviously, and he makes it look easy. You know, I think he's forgotten more about movie making than I'll ever know. You know.
But then it's the same thing though, isn't it? He was working with compromise, he was working with the situation he was in, he was working again. I mean, on Duel, what did he have? No money.
11 days, 13 days, something like that. And what they did is fantastic. And I have to say, like, you know, for me, my closest thing to that is something like my Ruin short, you know, where it was just, I made it for myself, and it was a very challenging kind of technical exercise. But I also look back on it even today, and I kind of like, holy crap, you know, I don't think I would have attempted that had I known what I know today. Like in that case, ignorance is bliss. You know, that being that naive was key to even stepping into that, you know, and following that drive that I had to make that thing. So I look at that still and be like, wow, it's still pretty impressive to me actually that I kind of pulled that off. But that's good. That's a good thing to do. I think it's like I always tell people, it's like, you know, you have to got to reach really far. You got to be ambitious to try to make an impact. And the truth is, no matter what you do, you never actually reach the desired result. You never get that far. Everything about movie making and that kind of stuff is compromised. It all kind of limits you in some way, right? Whether it's a technical thing or money thing or whatever it is. And so if you don't reach really, really far for something, and you're going to get halfway there versus someone else who reaches pretty close but still only gets halfway there, you've gone way far. So I always say, be ambitious, try to fail, and especially when it's like you're not on the job, on the clock somewhere where you can fail for free. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's important to do that, I think.
Whenever I mention Duel, I do have to give a name check to John Dahl's criminally underseen film, which I think was Joyride in America, but Roadkill over here, which has got it's the only thing that's come close to the intensity of those live-action road sequences.
It's one of the truck, right?
Yeah. John Dahl, hugely underrated in America. But some of the stuff that he put out was just incredible.
Yeah.
You mentioned Ruin there. Ruin clearly was, and I encourage anyone to go and find this film, because you talk there about if you'd know what that was going to be, you never would have attempted it.
Yeah.
And I'm watching it with the best will in the world, because on your YouTube channel, it's in a progression from, Supply Side Jesus, and then 2 films later, it's Ruin.
Right.
And just from a technical point of view, the jump is extraordinary.
Yeah, definitely. But I had done this short before that, Work in Progress.
Yeah.
Which was my little Pixar-y. That was my little Disney kind of short film thing.
Even so,
beyond that, you're right. It was a big jump.
A jump from a work in progress.
Yeah, and that was like several years of just dabbling in this CG thing and being a generalist in terms of animation and visual effects and all that stuff. And I just had this itch to make something for myself, and no, you're right. It was. I still look back on it, and I do still say that's impressive. It still holds up to some degree.
So during the day, you were working on things like DVD menus and Celebrity Apprentice and stuff like that. And then you would go home and just over a number of years.
Yeah.
Nick Park, again, it took him 7 years to do his first Wallace and Gromit film, didn't it? Just doing it in the evenings and stuff like that. And that was kind of your.
Yeah, but different projects. But but Ruin itself took 8 months.
Interesting.
That's what it took me. I basically said, I'm not going to work anymore. I'm gonna
stop completely.
Yeah, I just stopped working, and that was, I saved up my money, and I told myself I'm not gonna work. I'm not gonna take any jobs. I'm just gonna devote myself to this one project. And I thought it was gonna be 6 months at a time.
Yeah.
But it turned into 8, because it became much more technically involved than I realized. But yeah, that was the kind of sacrifice that I made, for myself. And
what were you eating for those 6 months?
Yeah, I was eating all the money I'd saved, But yeah, I told myself at the end of it that I'd make this thing, I'd feel good about myself, and then I would use it as a reel to go get into a visual effects house. I thought I was going to work for ILM or Weta, you know what I mean, and get a job doing that stuff. And in fact, J.J. Abrams had seen Ruin, and he was one of the first guys that called me, and they actually hired me to come be a part of this Rebel unit to work on the next Star Trek 2, to do some in-house VFX shots. And I was like one of 5 or 6 guys that were going to bring the computers in and be this kind of this rebel kind of unit, visual effects unit on the thing. I was literally moving my computer into the offices at Bad Robot when I got the job to do Maze Runner. and
that's incredible.
Yeah. So that was a wild time,
And so, you mentioned Maze Runner there, because originally wasn't the plan that Ruin that was going to be developed to some degree as the feature itself?
Yeah, that's how I kind of sold it. That Ruin short is what really became my calling card in a way. It went all around town. And everyone, I kind of met a lot of great people who I still know to this day, right? And then it was around the same time that the people at Fox, actually Steve Asbell, who was a creative executive over there, who now runs 20th Century, you know what I mean, which is wild. Talking about relationships here, and then so Steve said, you got to bring it in and we'll play it on the lot, and show some producers on the lot, what you did here. And and so they did that, and then it was literally after I screened that on the lot for a couple of producers there who just wanted to see it on their little private lot there at 20th Century Fox at the time. As I was leaving out of that, another executive walked up to me and said, almost like some drug dealer or something, pulled a book out of her jacket and handed me this thing and, hey, go read this, tell me what you would do with it. And it was Maze Runner. And so
just imagine if you been handed 50 shows.
Exactly, right. Yeah, and she said, it's got mazes in it. I was like, okay. I was like, I'll check it out. So I read it, and I was like, oh, I know what to do with this. It's Lord of the Flies meets Lost or something, you know what I mean?
That instinctive.
Yeah, after I read the book. Yeah, after I kind of pretty much really quickly understood aesthetically how to deal with it. You know what I mean? I started doing some artwork for it, and so that took a couple weeks, and while I was doing that, working on the Maze Runner, figuring out that kind of the pitch for it, essentially, Steve Asbell was also working on the deal to buy and work on a movie version of Ruin. And so there was like a week where I went in and pitched my take for the Maze Runner to the head of Fox at the time, Emma Watts.
Yeah.
And so I pitched that version, and that was on a Monday, and she said, okay, great, you're our director. And then 2 days later, I came in and I pitched Ruin, and he said, great, we're buying it. And so in 1 week, I had Maze Runner and Ruin started my career. You know what I mean? It's wild.
And you could have just been buried in the end credits of Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yeah, it could have been, which I've been happy with. I would have loved that stuff too. Yeah. A lot of guys, really talented people, have been involved in that.
Of course, I'm not slighting that. I'm always taken as well with the story of how like Blue Sky Studios effectively, the Ice Age films effectively came out of Alien Resurrection.
Oh, really? I didn't know that before.
They come together and were doing shots on Alien Resurrection for Fox, and that got them into the room where they could say, actually, we want to do this thing with the squirrel, and like in the Arctic and stuff like that.
That's what it takes, And and I gotta say, at the time, Fox was like that. It's all been kind of disbanded now for the most part. There's still some people that still survive that, but it was this little family. It was just people that made simple choices, and they trusted people, and they had instincts on stuff, and they gave people chances. It didn't always work, but it was awesome that they did, and it worked for me. And it was a good time.
Willing to put 20 films a year out.
Yeah,
at
sure.
a point where studios were not willing to, and of course we're in different times.
Yeah, we're in a different world now, for sure. Yeah.
And I'm not looking to punch your current paymasters at all. It's more that was the era that you came into.
Yeah, right. So it was a different time. I still go back to the lot. We mixed the latest movie. We still mixed there on the Hawk stage, on the Ford stage, and it is I love driving on that lot. It was for me. It was the first lot that I felt like I belonged. I wasn't just a visitor. I had a badge. And I could drive.
A parking space?
Yeah, I didn't have a parking space. I wasn't that good yet.
Okay.
But I could drive on, and it was my home. You know what I mean? So I loved that. I never got over that feeling of I make movies.
Yeah.
For a movie studio.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I still love that stuff.
You're the 8th person to make a Planet of the Apes film.
That's true. That's cool.
It's like, I was talking to Gil Keenan for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, and we were just demonstrating, 4 people have done a Ghostbusters film, and that franchise just means so much to him.
Yeah, man. His Monster House. Monster House. Yeah, Monster House. Yeah.
Great film.
Yeah.
Saved by Zemeckis and Spielberg.
Yeah, and that was for me. It was a big kind of thing. Like it made me kind of like, oh, I want to do this.
The last act of that film.
Yeah, it's cool. And he's really great.
So you went into Maze Runner, and from what I can work out, you were almost. It's one of those, again, where you didn't quite know what was on the other side. And it sounds like you were treating it to a degree like an independent film, and you've got this young cast, a camaraderie together. I saw you come back together over lockdown to do a cast read, and you all still got on.
And
it's only when you see so many of those faces on screen, and you see how many moving parts there were just in front of the camera, never mind behind it. What was the experience of that like? What was making Maze Runner like, contrasting making a Planet of the Apes film?
No, very similar. Just the resources were more or less in the case of Maze Runner. It was $34 million at that time. It was it's like a romantic comedy budget. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it started out as like a $20 million movie when I first came on. So it's, okay, it makes sense. Okay, let's give this young kid. He kind of seems to know visual effects. All that kind of stuff. Let's give him a chance. let's give him a shot and see what he can do. And then we kind of worked on the script, and I had all these ideas. And if I get excited about something, and I get in a room, I can usually kind of convince people of a lot. I get enthusiasm, a lot of enthusiastic kind of just bouncing off the walls, and that enthusiasm becomes kind of infectious in a way. So I had a pretty clear idea of what that should be and how it should feel, and then and after I started pitching it and showing some of the artwork that we kind of created for it, I realized, okay, this can't be made for $20 million. But let's give them a little bit more. It seems the risk was worth it, so it became $34 million, right? And so
that artwork got the budget up. Right?
Yeah, definitely. After I started seeing the vision, which I hate that word, but the vision of what that could be. it kind of grew. And then that's how I was introduced to my producing partner now in our company, Joe Hartwick.
Yeah.
That's how he got involved and as a kind of a line producer essentially. And he kind of made sure that okay, he set me up for success. He surrounded me with good people, a good team. You know what I mean? That would fill the gaps I didn't know about, right? And so ultimately, yeah, we just started shooting this thing, and it was an 8-week shoot, so it was a very short thing. It's obviously a big kind of world creation thing, but I knew enough to be dangerous about the visual effects thing of it all, and yeah, we just went off and made this thing, and cast some great actors and put them all in kind of a room together. And it really felt like we were this little indie kind of spirit essentially, making what was trying to be a big franchise starter. That's what I remember when I first came on. I remember the studio kind of coming up to me and saying, Lionsgate or whatever has Hunger Games. We want our Hunger Games. And I was like, I'll try.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not. It's that. I think the book sales were like incredibly different.
Yes.
60 million versus like 3 million.
The Lord of the Flies.
That's right.
Just at the
That's
half.
right. But I don't know. It's funny enough. Those major movies are still playing.
Yeah.
Like I just saw internationally on Netflix. It's number 4 or something. Still internationally the other day, and then Scorch Trials was number
page of my Disney Plus screen.
Yeah, isn't that freaking wild? Like 10 years old movie, and it was very successful and made lots of money, and I think surprised a lot of people. So that's cool.
So where are you at that point in your career on the imposter syndrome-ometer? Is imposter syndrome a thing for you?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
Is there a point where you just kind of thought, actually, I'm not bad? Because I always think that's quite a turning point in your professional life, where you realise, for want of a better way of putting it, you're not shit at what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know. I certainly, when I believe something, I have confidence to go chase it, right or wrong. So at least I've always, yeah, that's right. I've always had that. So I don't necessarily, second guess that instinct. I follow my instincts on that kind of stuff, the gut level thing. But I also, I don't know, I value humility. I try to stay humble because I don't want to get in that position where it's like someone can't come up to me and say, hey, that was crap, dude.
Yeah.
This is a bad idea. I don't want to be in that position. You know what I mean? So I try to stay out of the kind of typical Hollywood stuff and say, oh, I'm hot shit. You know what I mean? I don't.
I'm just going to edit this, so that's all it's going to say.
I don't want to be that person. I kind of fear that in a weird way. In a way, I have to almost be careful I don't go too far the other way, where I second guess myself constantly. You know what I mean? But yeah, I don't know. I don't really think about it on that level. I just try to find things that really gets me excited, that I have a kind of this burning kind of like passion to kind of do, and I trust that, and we move forward and try to make something cool together.
Were you still feeling that as you got towards the end of Maze Runner? I mean, I'm not going for the tittle tattle, but obviously the third one was delayed, and you're sat waiting to completely film. This moment in the sun is sort of going away a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, those movies are interesting. The fact that, I don't know, it's too early for me to look back on, but, maybe in 20, 30 years to look back at how I got my start on a trilogy.
Alexander Payne has a 7-year rule. Apparently, he's going back to his films. Look at his film again for another 7 years.
That's interesting. It's hard for me to go back and watch stuff, to be honest. But usually if I ever do, I usually watch it with the sound off,
Spielberg does that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Interesting. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, he'll always, whenever, because quite a lot of his films come up for regrading, and he'll just sit and watch them in silence.
Yeah, that's for me. It lets me kind of like not cringe, in a weird way. I can just, it's somehow not quite complete, so I can just kind of look at it and watch it and judge the choices on it. Yeah, I don't know. Those 3 movies are interesting, and they show, look, that I was tied to a book series there, you know what I mean? And a book series that, I have to admit, I sort of fell in love with a little bit less with each subsequent one. But at the same time, I was learning as a director the art of execution.
Well, that opening sequence of the third one is full on intense.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That was fun to do, yeah. And again, we made that movie for $60 million. You know what I mean? So that was another one where we're constantly trying to prove that we could do more with less in those movies. That's the thing about the Maze Runner movies. It's like the combined budgets of those 3 movies is still less than this one Planet of the Apes movie. You know what I mean? But we still made almost $1 billion. So it worked. It was successful. It worked somehow for people, for the fan base that it was meant for. But I do look at those movies and see like kind of a strange kind of inverted curve, or one where like maybe the story got a little bit, out of control a little bit,
Yeah.
but the execution I think actually went up. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting thing, which I guess is why for me, Scorch Trials, which people seem to not like as much, I look at that and I see, that we did like $50 million and we did a lot of great execution stuff there. I lost probably track of a little bit of story stuff there, but looking back on it, but I do look at that and say, wow, it looks good. Technically, on an execution level, I kind of figured out how to make a movie. You know what I mean? So I like to say those major movies were, for the most part, they were really good practice. For what would come next, which is the Planet of the Apes movies. But
there was the Mouse Guard in between, of course, as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I always want to name check because again, the fact that you were candid and put that out there. And I'm curious. I mean, there's two things I'm curious really. Number one is what your 2019 was like, because that looks like an absolute roller coaster year where the Mouse Guard goes and Planet of the Apes enters your life.
Yeah.
And number two, you paid any kind of price for being so candid about the Mouse Guard?
Not
really.
really.
If you don't want to go there.
Not really. No, not really. I mean, it was just an unfortunate thing. I mean, the Mouse Guard was amazing. It was really incredible.
I watched the footage.
Yeah, you saw that too, and there's more that you hadn't seen that we had done.
Are you linking that scene?
We'll see.
VHS
Well, I'm hoping maybe I can spin the hopeful success of the Apes movies, and we can try to get that thing back off the ground. But like, I've never worked on something that was so creatively rich.
Yeah.
It was incredible. And I mean, I had that all around us. We had a huge art team around us, right? And we built up a whole studio and a new way of technology of leveraging the kind of Unreal Engine and how we're going to produce this thing with Weta. It was just a whole new way to make movies, and we were going to make it for what we at the time was a very reasonable price. Looking back on it now, it's too expensive. So that would be the next thing we have to figure out to make it cheaper. But anyway, it was just a joy to work on every day. And I mean, I had artists coming up to me constantly that were just like, this movie, I'm having so much fun on this movie. They just had such a good time. You just feel it all around us. Like, people just feel like we were doing something really special, really, really, really cool and fun. And and then when it crashed and burned, it was sad. But everyone was very gracious about it. It wasn't like, screw you, this movie sucks. It was more like, look, we're not going to make this. We're sorry, but see if someone else will take over this price, the making of it. So they allowed us to go take it out and shop it around town. Problem is, all the studios, they have their budget set out for the year, and so no one could take up the burden of this process, this thing. So it just died, And I just said, well, you know what? It's like, it's a shame that no one's going to see this stuff. I'm gonna put out not the stuff we did for the movie, because there was a whole bunch of stuff for that, for a year's worth of work, 2 years almost of work for the movie. Yeah. And what I did put out there was just the opening. It was my first pitch for why we should consider making this movie. It was before we even had a script. Yeah. It was just a simple process of like, hey, this is the potential of what this could be. And so that's why I made that little previs thing using the Unreal Engine. It was my first experience with it, which I've since fallen in love with.
I've seen you, again, you've been very open about showing what Unreal Engine tools can do. Mm-hmm. And these tools traditionally for making video games, aren't they? For people who are unfamiliar with them. Yeah. But are now, the interesting thing for me about Unreal Engine is it's making low-budget filmmaking more, in a weird way, affordable and reachable.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, if they want to start going into visual effects or animations, learn Unreal. Yeah. You need to go into that because it's really an incredible tool, and it's only getting better. It's an incredible power. Like, if I were doing Ruin today, I'd use the Unreal Engine for sure.
It'd take half time.
Yeah,
it would. The Glade.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can do it. It's amazing. It's amazing the tools that are capable and available to us.
One of the interesting things in your Planet of the Apes film, though, I always remember when Gareth Edwards was making monsters and doing the visual effects in his room, but also alongside the computer work that he was doing, he knew the value of a good sign. Mm-hmm. Of just, you watch Aliens and you see the sub-level 3 sign. It's like, what did that cost? What, $10,000 or something like that? Right. It's ingrained in my head. The signs in Monsters are good. And there's a moment, which I won't spoil in Planet of the Apes, where we arrive at somewhere and there's a bit of signage. I'm just curious of the physicality of that you can, because we're all sport brats as movie watchers now. It's like Jurassic Park doesn't impress us anymore.
That's right.
Terminator 2
it does impress me.
Well, it impresses us,
me
but
still.
It doesn't impress us on the technical level in the same way it was. Yeah. I was in the cinema watching Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park. Yeah. Holy shit, I've not seen anything like that. Yeah. Now I've seen it on a kids channel.
Yeah,
something like that.
That's true.
You have to work harder to impress me.
Yeah, that's true, and that's just the nature of the beast, and so in a weird way, now that CG has happened, it's like we we take it all for granted anyway.
Yeah.
So now we just have to focus on great stories.
And science.
You know, and great science. Yeah, but you're right. We try to ground the movie in reality, you know, and yeah, they would have a freaking sign up, you know, that would tell you where to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also a thing about, let's do Spielberg again. When Spielberg was designing Minority Report, and when that was being put together, the whole idea was we're living in the same buildings that were up 100 years later. So the architecture and the layout of the world, and again, I'm going very spoiler line that we see in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, is very grounded in what's around us at the moment. And I'm just wondering how you keep your feet on the ground when it comes to design like that.
Well, it's just, I think it's just rooted in what we're not trying to make a fantasy here. It's not that's where Mouse Guard was totally different. It was a totally fantastical world where we could be, you know, this huge Avatar-like kind of experience. But, you know, the Maze Runner movies, this movie, all this stuff that we have done lately, is just, it wants to be taken, it's got to have a grounded truth to it, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of inherent in kind of the needs of the story, you know what I mean? But that is the fun of it, is like seeing our world overgrown and, you know, slowly eroding away, you know, as time kind of erases the existence of human beings in the world, you know. So it was fun to play with that as a location backdrop thing, for sure.
So I asked Gil Keenan this about if he had a Jonathan Mostow moment as someone that grew up with Ghostbusters. And so the Jonathan Mostow moment is, there was a point on the set of Terminator 3 where Schwarzenegger steps out of the trailer and he just goes to himself, holy shit, I'm making a Terminator movie. I just wonder about that kid who was watching that Planet of the Apes VHS tape. Was there a moment on this set where you just thought, my God, I'm making a Planet of the Apes?
Honestly, you know what it was? It was day one.
Tell me.
It was day one, and we were out on the beach.
Yeah.
It was that scene when they're walking along the beach, tied up with the characters of May and Noah. And we had these giant horses, you know, galloping through the ocean, the water on the shore, and the weather had turned kind of sour, but it looked kind of amazing, the cloudy skies, but the sun was still peeking through, and it was like, it's the kind of light that you just dream about wishing you could get, but you can never, you know, recreate. And we watched the dailies for that thing, and we're like, it looks like an Apes movie. This is Planet of the Apes movie, you know. It's like we were all really jazzed by it, you know, feeling like, holy crap! Oh yeah, we're making one of those movies. There was this one shot in particular. It looks like the shot from Charlton Heston, you know, on the beach, you know, and it was amazing, you know. And we're like, yes. And then we went into, you know, oh crap, we got a lot of work to do ahead of us, you know. So it's back into trying to execute the whole thing.
Did you ever read the John Gregory Dunn book, The Studio?
No.
Of his time monitoring 20th Century Fox in like 1967. No. And it's really interesting behind the scenes. And it goes to what was known as the laughter test on the first Planet of the Apes film, about how the fate of whether they decided to make that film rested on 9 people in a 20th Century Fox office.
Interesting.
That they paid for the makeup test, and if any of those executives in that room had laughed,
they would give it up.
They would give the whole project
I've seen that test too, actually.
Yeah, they put it on YouTube.
The makeup effects don't quite hold up the same, you know, but it was interesting that they okay, this is going to work. Let's go for it. Let's take this dive, you know.
So what's your equivalent? How do you know that your Planet of the Apes film is holding water?
Well, I mean, the truth is we're not in the same. We're not in the same. We're not in the same boat though, because they had that moment on Rise, you know, the Planet of the Apes, where it's like, is this going to work? Having a CG character that we're going to believe is true, you know, that they had to voyage out into that kind of new frontier, and because they did and figured it all out, they proved that it could work. So we didn't have that challenge for us. For us, it was just purely, I think, why make another one? Yeah, it was the story, you know.
Why make another one?
That's right.
Okay,
good. That was the question, because, you know, the previous trilogy was so well done. It was so kind of rounded, beginning, middle, end. You know, when I was asked to do this thing, it's like I wasn't interested in making a part 4. That just didn't seem appealing to me at all. Why do it? You know what I mean? And it wasn't until we kind of found like a way to separate ourselves from it, to give us some distance.
Quickly as well.
Yeah, exactly. And like it just opened up all these new opportunities for us, where we could start with new characters and kind of have essentially a new beginning. A world that's growing out of what was set up before. So that trilogy of movies became kind of set up for this new chapter. You know what I mean? And so once we kind of did that, it felt like, okay, now we have something we have a reason to exist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This isn't just a kind of a shameless kind of cash grab or something. You know what I mean? And so once we kind of found that story idea, we felt confident in it and felt inspired, and it felt like, yeah, this seems cool. And so we went forward. You know what I mean? It was a big deal.
And you also know going into a 10th Planet of the Apes movie, there's a sporting chance there's going to be an 11th.
Yeah.
So presumably you have to, again, I'm going to spoil a lot, but presumably you have to, whether you're going to continue that or not personally, I mean, you're going to Zelda, I think, if I'm reading the right trade papers, that you have to, as the custodian, leave it in a place where you can hand it to the next person.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, let's not be naive. It's like this is a big, important franchise for the studio, and you know, it was certainly on our minds that what we're doing here is starting something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, you know, yeah, and obviously having just done a trilogy of movies, I'm kind of aware of, okay, let's think about this ahead of time this time, and not just like, we didn't really do that in the first Maze Runner movie. We weren't thinking about the second movie, even though there was other books. You know, we probably would have done things a little differently if we had just thought a little bit, you know, ahead of time. So we have thoughts and ideas of where this could go, coming up with a story and a set of characters and ideas that can sustain multiple movies. You know what I mean? And at the same time, I think the challenge is making sure that this one movie feels like it has its beginning, middle, and end. It's not just a total cliffhanger. You know what I mean? It certainly there's a door that opens essentially by the end, but you do feel like there's a journey that's been had, and Noah kind of leaves one place and arrives at another. You know what I mean?
So I'm coming to the end of time here, but there's one thing I really want to ask you about, because I think it's something you talked about in the past. It goes through your work as well. Sound. It's just like the most overlooked part of movie. I always think someone like Robert Zemeckis is a masterful director of sound, one of the best there is.
Also really good with camera. I mean, he's underestimated. His camera work is amazing.
You see The Walk?
Yeah, it's great stuff too. But I look at like Contact recently again.
Contact is amazing.
It's amazing. And also Forrest Gump and what he did in there. It's like he's such a masterful, like when he was forced and restrained by like the limitations of production, typical production stuff. Like
Paramount cut the budget on it just before it started.
Yeah, that's right. But I don't know. I can study that stuff. It's a very classical sense of like moving masters and stuff like that. But anyway, that's a whole different discussion. But you're right. Sound is at least 50% of the experience.
So tell me about making sound for a Planet of the Apes movie.
Yeah,
this was an audio feast as well.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. We spent a lot of time on that, especially we mix it natively in Atmos, so we start there, and then it gets folded down to all the different formats out there. But that's a big part of it. It's like it's part of the immersion of going into this world that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? It's all the birds and the soundscapes and the creaking and the groaning and in a weird way, we spend a lot of time thinking about, oh, you know what? In this moment here, it's kind of a funny moment. So can you find me a bird sound that almost sounds like a laugh that kind of accompanies this moment? So there's all kinds of subconscious stuff like that it just goes into the soundscape of the movie. And of course, we also there's plenty of Easter eggs, like taking sounds from the old '68 movie and we're putting it into this movie. It's like there's all this kind of fun work that Eiling and Andy, one of our other mixers who did all Spielberg's movies, by the way, they're just amazing, and it's a small team what they do, and it's so crucial. It's a real magic thing, that the sound it can make a bad picture look great. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Wes Ball, you are the 8th person to make a Planet of the Apes.
How about that?
Time has come to an end. I'm huge. I love the through line of your story of the kid watching the dodgy VHS, not dodgy, we're in the UK.
That's right.
Illegal VHS copy of it, and then we're sat here in a hotel room talking about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
Dreams do come true.
I love it. Wes Ball, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me.
And that brings to the end my conversation with Wes Ball. Again, apologies for the audio. We did battle with that, and hopefully you got something out of that conversation. I thought Wes Ball was really terrific and a really interesting man as well. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is playing in cinemas around the world at the point this podcast is being released. But it brings me to the end of this latest episode. And as always, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. You can find more from me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Simon Brew. More from the entire Film Stories project at Film Stories on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. Facebook.com/Film Stories online. YouTube.com/Film Stories. Our online shop is store.filmstories.co.uk. Lots of print magazines. God love them. And Blu-rays as well that we've made are on sale there. And our website is filmstories.co.uk. simonbrew.uk. If you want to support this podcast and get it ad-free and get it early, patreon.com/simonbrew is where you need to head. I think that's enough from me, though. I've horribly overrun, as always. The main thing is you all take care. You all look after yourselves. I will be back soon with another bunch of film stories. Until then, the very best to you. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.